When you think of World War I, what comes to mind? Muddy trenches, barbed wire, and the relentless stalemate of the Western Front, right? For over 100 years, our collective memory has been dominated by places like the Somme and Verdun. But what if I told you that was just one chapter in a much larger, truly global conflict? The Great War was fought on a scale we can barely comprehend across scorching deserts, frozen mountains, and vast oceans. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the forgotten fronts of World War I to uncover the stories of soldiers and battles that history has left behind. Let's travel first to the towering peaks of the Alps, to what's known as the White War here. On the Italian front, Italy and Austria-Hungary fought a brutal campaign at altitudes of up to 12,000 feet. Forget muddy trenches, these soldiers dug their fortifications into solid rock and glacial ice. They faced enemies you couldn't shoot, avalanches, frostbite, and the sheer terror of high-altitude warfare. Soldiers built entire barracks, cableways, and tunnels inside the mountains. Imagine the engineering and human endurance required. This wasn't just a battle against each other, but a constant battle against nature itself. Entire platoons could be wiped out in an instant by a single avalanche, a silent, white death. It's a theater of war so extreme it almost sounds like fiction. Now, let's journey from the frozen Alps to the burning sands of the Middle East. The Mesopotamian campaign, fought in modern-day Iraq, was a world away from Europe. Here, British and Indian troops clashed with the forces of the Ottoman Empire. The goal, to secure the region's vital oil fields and protect the Suez Canal. But the conditions were hellish. Temperatures soared past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and diseases like cholera and dysentery were as deadly as any bullet. The siege of Catalamara in 1916 was a devastating moment, where a British Indian force of over 13,000 men was forced to surrender after a brutal 5-month siege. It was one of Britain's worst military defeats at the time, yet it's a story rarely told in Western classrooms. This front also famously saw the exploits of T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab revolt against the Ottomans, a guerrilla war that reshaped the future of the entire Middle East. But the war wasn't confined to land. The naval battle of the Falkland Islands in December 1914 is a perfect example of the war's global reach. Off the coast of South America, a British squadron hunted down and decisively defeated a German cruiser squadron. This single battle effectively ended Germany's surface raider threat in the Atlantic and Pacific, securing crucial Allied shipping lanes. Think about it, a major naval engagement of a European war taking place thousands of miles away in the remote South Atlantic. It highlights how the conflict was fought over control of the world's oceans, the lifelines of empires. These sailors fought and died in icy waters, far from any trench, their fates decided by gunpowder and steel in the middle of nowhere. Next, we head to Africa, where the war looked completely different again. The East African Campaign was one of the longest and most bizarre chapters of the entire war. A small, brilliantly led German colonial force, known as the Schutztruppe, under the command of Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, waged a 4-year guerrilla war against a much larger allied force of British, Belgian, and Portuguese troops. They were never truly defeated. In fact, Lettow-Vorbeck's army was the only German force to successfully invade British territory during the war. They fought a hit-and-run campaign across what is now Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zambia, living off the land and tying down hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers who were desperately needed elsewhere. The human cost was immense, especially for the African porters and soldiers, the Askari, who served on both sides. Their stories, their sacrifices, are an essential but often overlooked part of the war's legacy in Africa. He finally surrendered only after being shown proof that the armistice had been signed in Europe. Let's not forget the Eastern Front, which, while not entirely forgotten, is often overshadowed by the West. The scale here was immense. The front stretched for over 1,000 miles from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Unlike the static trench warfare of the West, the Eastern Front was characterized by movement, massive armies maneuvering across vast plains. Battles like Tannenberg and the Brusilov offensive involved millions of men and resulted in casualties that are difficult to fathom. It was this brutal conflict that led to the collapse of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, fundamentally changing the course of the 20th century. The sheer human suffering on this front, for soldiers and civilians alike, was staggering, yet its narrative often gets lost in the shadow of the Western Front. And finally, we have a front that's almost completely erased from popular memory, the Salonika Front, also known as the Macedonian Front. Established in Greece in 1915, this was a truly multinational theater. British, French, Serbian, Italian, and Russian troops faced off against German, Austro-Hungarian, and Bulgarian forces in the rugged Balkan Mountains. Soldiers here battled not just the enemy, but also malaria, which was so rampant it was nicknamed General Malaria. For years, it was a static front, mocked by some as the largest internment camp in Europe. But in 1918, a final, decisive Allied offensive from Salonika broke the Bulgarian lines, leading to their surrender and triggering the rapid collapse of the Central Powers. The Forgotten Army of Salonika delivered a crucial blow that helped end the war, proving their long, arduous campaign was anything but pointless. So why have these fronts been forgotten? The simple answer is that history is often written by the victors, and the narrative that dominated after the war was the Anglo-French experience on the Western Front. The poetry, the films, the memorials, they all focused on the trenches of France and Belgium. But the Great War was a world war in the truest sense. From the ice-bound mountains of Italy to the sun-scorched plains of Iraq, from the jungles of Africa to the vastness of the Atlantic, men and women from every corner of the globe were caught up in its turmoil. By remembering these forgotten fronts, we gain a truer, more complete understanding of the conflict that shaped our modern world. We honor the millions whose stories have been silenced by history. Their war was just as real, their sacrifice just as great. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the lesser-known battlefields of World War I. If you found this interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. What other forgotten parts of history would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.